Amanda, you are no stranger to putting pen to paper. That's for sure. You know, you've wrote your first book in 2013, Waiting to be Heard. This one I have with me, which is your latest, which is called Free. Why write another one, Amanda? Does it not bring it all up again? Does it not take you back into the spotlight again, which is what you want to shy away from, don't you?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack just in that question. So, first of all, yes, I wrote a memoir back in 2013 called Waiting to be Heard, and I'm very proud of that book, and it accomplished what I needed to accomplish at that time, which was I was a young person who was still on trial for a horrific crime that I had nothing to do with, and I had been in prison up to that point. So I went from being an anonymous, college student to vilified woman globally, and I had had basically no say in the matter, no possibility of telling my side of the story unless I was, in a witness chair in front of a judge and a jury. And so I didn't really have a chance to go out there and share my perspective about the trial itself, about the case itself. And so Waiting to be Heard was really trying to set the record straight, talk about the case from my own perspective. But looking back on it, all of these years later, when I think back on it, I think that, yes, it is my perspective of this thing that happened to me, but that's it. It's a thing that happened to me. It is a thing that I had no agency in. It wasn't about any choices that I made. It wasn't about anything, I did not have the power in the equation. So I was just telling a story about the consequences of when a man breaks into a person's home and rapes and murders an innocent human being, and then when the cops betray the person who went to them for help. So that's what Waiting to be Heard is the story of. Free, my search for meaning, is what I feel is my story. It is the story of how I have survived that experience, how I navigated the prison environment and was able to find a sense of purpose even within those very punitive limitations, and how I discovered upon being released from prison that I did not get to go back to being an anonymous person, that I was forever branded the girl accused of murder. My very identity had become wrapped up and mixed together with the death of my friend. And I had to try to make sense of that. And part of it involved making a lot of mistakes, making mistakes that some of them were public and people were aware of, and some of them were not, the most devastating of which were not. Somehow I was able to sort of keep the certain mistakes that I made under wraps and
What kind of
allowed to
mistakes,
be
Amanda?
oh my goodness, like trusting the wrong people. There's a story, I mean, as you well know, having read the book, of me really at a low point in my life. 2014, I was reconvicted of this crime in absentia. I was graduating from college. So really, I felt like when I came home, going to college was my way of trying to get back to a sense of normalcy, but even that was now going away, and I was now facing extradition, and my entire life was just in shambles. And it was just at that moment that I happened to meet a person that I name Mike in the book. That's not his real name, but who told me that he was also a wrongly convicted person. And I felt this deep compulsion to connect with him because I felt like I did not have a place in the world. Other people didn't understand me. I was really, really lonely. And so I really, out of a desire to embrace another human being, to feel embraced, to also sort of not think about my own problems and instead focus on helping another person with their problems, I really devoted myself to this person who then turned out to be actually guilty and who then went on to break into my home and to steal things from me. It was just horrendous. And the worst part about it was, I have deep, deep trauma about home invasion, right? Like, I came home, my home was invaded. I called the police for help, and then I got put in jail. My home was invaded again. based upon some bad guy who had taken advantage of me, conned me. He broke into my home, and I no longer felt safe to call the police, so I didn't. And I had to figure out how to navigate that situation without the help of law enforcement because of my deep fear of law enforcement and distrust of how if this event became public in the news, it would not be viewed as Amanda, victim of home invasion and con man. It would have been Amanda shacking up with a person who breaks and enters into people's homes. Like it would always be viewed in the worst possible light given the scandal that was around my name. And so I had I was a person who had experienced trauma, who was experiencing PTSD, who was trying to process all of this bad stuff that happened to me while still in the midst of having to fight for my life and to prove my innocence. And I was making the mistakes that a person in their 20s might make because they're inexperienced in the world and they're lonely and they're stupid. But like the consequences for me were so high.
So much higher than anybody else. Now, Amanda,
Yes.
as you say, it's called Free, your book, My Search for Meaning. You have been free, as in out of prison, for a long time now. But do you feel free of the different kinds of shackles that all encompasses for you and your life?
Great question. Because really that idea, what is freedom? What does it mean to be free is something that I've spent my entire adult life contemplating, having had my freedom stolen from me. And, when I was in prison, I really was able to eventually wrap my mind around the idea that I could live a purposeful life even within the limitations of prison, even if I was forced to live an unfair, desperate life like that, I could still live my best life. But I still had this idea in my mind that obviously my life would be better if I was outside of prison, and that I got to get, I fantasized about getting my life back, that life of being an anonymous college student. And then when I came home and I was pursued home by helicopters, and for months on end, I couldn't go to the grocery store without somebody just popping out of the bushes with a, camcorder in my face. Like I realized that, and, years later, not just months later, but years later, again, the camera's popping out of the bushes to try to get pictures of me and my husband, or me as a pregnant person, like all of these things of like being a person in the public interest, in the public eye, whether I have asked to be or not, has made me feel very, very trapped. And in particular, because there is this, celebrity culture thing to it where people think that I'm being treated like a celebrity. But the problem is that I'm not being treated as a celebrity. I'm being treated as a morbid curiosity. I'm not known for having accomplished something or having, I'm not known for something that I did. I'm known for something that I didn't do. And so
I guess,
the
Amanda,
feeling of being
I suppose,
trapped.
and I suppose so many people across the whole world think they know you. They think they know for definite what you did. To them, you're a girl who killed her British roommate. What do you want readers of your book, listeners to this podcast, to think of you now?
Well, that's an interesting point. One of my goals with this book wasn't necessarily to convince everyone about, who I really am. I'm not like making a case for my innocence in this book. It's not that. Like that was the goal of Waiting to Be Heard. I'm making the case for my innocence. This is what happened to me. This is the trial. This is how I'm interpreting the evidence and how I hope you will interpret the evidence. This book is about surviving trauma and processing it and making sense of it, and then finding a path forward in your life. And a huge goal of mine in this book was to no longer just be this object of morbid curiosity. It was to be a fully fleshed human being that's people could relate to. I think one of the most gratifying things that I have found since going through the process of telling my story and, going out there and talking about it, telling the stories of what I've gone through, is people coming out to me and saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you told your story because I see myself in you." Or, "I've experienced something very different, but the way that you articulated how you learned to view things in a new light has really helped me to process my own traumatic experiences." And so a big goal of mine is that anybody reading this book will not just see me, they will see themselves. And, just a fun little coda to that. Before this book came out, I translated myself, the entire thing, into Italian so that I could share it with Giuliano Mignini, who is a big, character in this book.
He's the man he was your prosecutor. Effectively, he was the
Yes.
man who, well, you say he helped, not helped, constructed this narrative about you, the she-devil, if you like, all around you, all around your trial. And he was the man who ultimately enabled the fact that you were convicted, you say.
Absolutely. And that is the fact of the matter. In Italy, prosecutors play much more of a controlling role in the investigation. And so he, from the very beginning, was the one who was in charge of the investigation, who was constructing the false narrative about me and was creating a monster out of an innocent person to support this narrative that was ultimately based upon flawed logic and flawed assumptions that the police and he made from the very get-go. And so as a figure in my life, he has been a nightmarish figure. And
I know, and I cannot quite comprehend myself why you did this. What we're about to talk about next is you. This is the man who effectively put you behind bars for 4 years of your life, has put you in the situation that you are now and have been for all this time. And yet you went back to Italy because you wanted to meet him and you wanted to come face to face with him. Why did you do that? What did you want from that?
This is a question for you because I'm actually really curious. A lot of people ask me this question, but I feel like what I did is actually not that incomprehensible if you're someone who has been hurt by another human being. I think that everyone who has been hurt by another human being wants to know why and wants to know if the person who hurt them realizes what they did and wants to see if there's any way that there can be some kind of understanding or accountability between the person who was harmed and the person who harmed them. And I felt like the Italian justice system and the media ecosystem was not positioning me to get the satisfaction that I needed as a victim. I wanted to understand. I didn't want to punish. I was not interested in punishing him. I wanted to understand him. I wanted to understand if he understood me now. And
did you want him to change his mind, Amanda?
Of course, I wanted him to change his mind.
Did
of course. Well, it's I would say yes, because it's interesting. So I talk about this in the book, and it's interesting the way everything worked out, because I originally reached out to him right before the pandemic, asking to meet with him in person. And then the pandemic happened, and so we couldn't meet in person. And then we spent 2 years corresponding with each other, getting to know each other outside of the adversarial criminal justice system. And I, as a victim, was not making demands of him. I was not demanding that he apologize, and I was not demanding that he change his mind. Instead, I positioned myself to witness him. And in witnessing him, he felt very seen. He didn't feel that he was being attacked, or that he needed to be on the defensive. And so over the course of our correspondence, he when we didn't speak directly about the case, we often found ourselves speaking indirectly about the case. He would ask me to watch a fictional TV show about a prosecutor who realized that the person he put in prison was actually innocent and so had them released from prison. I had him watch an episode of Star Trek where, Jean-Luc Picard and another captain are speaking in languages and cannot understand each other, and think that they're in some kind of conflict, but then realize that they're not. And so we were speaking to each other almost
In
as if in
code?
metaphor, almost as if in code. And then it was only once we sat down in person that we really got down to it. And I confronted him. I confronted him in the most I would like to say non-confrontational way possible. And the best way to describe my approach is that, well, I did for him what he did not do for me, which was give him the benefit of the doubt, which was to affirm what I absolutely knew was true, which was that he was wrong and that he had made a huge mistake, and that huge mistake had horrible consequences for me. But that didn't mean that it defined him, or that he was a bad person, or that he had malicious intent. All of those things that, as a victim, I might feel self-righteous about, I put aside, and I instead embraced him as another human being who is flawed, who is fragile, who is capable of being hurt.
Did he say
And I
sorry?
think he said he said a lot of things. And I do want to invite people to read the book.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to
I'm
set
not
you
gonna
up
give
to
everything
tease
away.
the book, Amanda.
Yes. So what I will say is that he maintains that he was always working in good faith, that he believed everything that he was doing. And at the same time, he absolutely acknowledges that he could and very likely made mistakes, and that his perspective about the case has evolved with time and with coming to know me as a human being. He has acknowledged that as he knows me as a person I am today, he does not think that I am capable of having committed that crime that he accused me of.
Now,
And
yeah.
right.
So, yeah.
So
Go on, you finish. You
what does
finish.
that mean? Well, so now I have to sit here and go, whatever he says. So on the one hand, like, I come out of the meeting and I tell my mom everything. I just do the whole download, like, Mom, this is what happened. And her response is, too little, too late.
That sounds like a mum.
Yeah, too little, too late. And you can look at it that way. That's a legitimate way to look at it. As a mom now, I can appreciate looking at it that way. But my response to my mom was, this is not about him anymore. This is about me, and the fact that I was willing to show up 100% for this human being who didn't deserve it from me. This was me taking a stand and doing something for the first time in my life that defined me more than a horrible thing that he did to me.
It was about you
And
taking control of something, and you felt out of control, kind of under his influence when you were
yeah.
young. Now, you talked about your mum then, and she didn't want to meet him. She didn't want to see him. Now you are a mum. You've got two little ones, a boy and a girl. Eureka and Echo, amazing names.
Thanks.
And now you are a mum. Can you comprehend what she went through?
So, yes, I There are a lot of people who say to me things like, why don't you just move on? Why are you still talking about this thing that happened, all these years ago? And well, one of the reasons why is it's still ongoing. Here I am 18 years later, still trying to clear my name of the last, charge that I've been charged with, So I'm still, trying to get truth and justice from the Italian justice system. But on top of that, that's not like my understanding of trauma and grief is that it doesn't just go away with time. It reasserts itself as you enter new stages of your life because every new stage of your life gives perspective on what came before it. And so becoming a mom, first of all, my primary concern was, am I going to be passing on, intentionally or unintentionally, this horrible experience that I have gone through, this terrible attention that's on me, this stigma that still lingers on me. Is our kids at the playground not going to want to invite her to a slumber party because she's, Amanda Knox's daughter? Like, these are things going through my head. Is she going to live in the shadow of the worst experience of my life? And
How
then the
do you,
second,
or how are you going to explain to them both that a lot of people think Mummy's a murderer?
yeah, let me get to that, but I'm going to finish my first thought, which is then
Sorry,
I
I have a
gave birth
habit of
to my daughter. Yeah.
interrupting. Just ask my
Yeah, it's
husband.
okay. It's okay. No, you're just like, oh, new thought. And I do have to finish one thought that I had before. So because I mentioned that I'd translated the whole book into Italian and shared it with my prosecutor before it was published. I'll just finish that thought now. I
Okay.
think one of the most extraordinary responses to that was his, which was he came away from it saying, of course I, disagree with some of the ways that you've interpreted the case, but I have never felt more seen, is what he told to me. And so I'll just let that linger. And then I'll go back to gave birth to my daughter. And the first thing that I felt overwhelmed by was the fact that she was in pain and I could not take her pain from her. There was nothing I could do. And so as they laid her on my chest, the first words that came out of me were, "I'm sorry." Because I was helpless I wanted to take her pain from her and take it upon myself, and I couldn't. And then I'm so hyper where I look over to my mom who's in the room, and I realize that that is what my mom felt the entire time that I was in prison. And that is what Meredith's mom felt the second she learned what had happened to her daughter. Like, that feeling of just utter helplessness and wishing that you could take all of the pain and all of the bad stuff that happens to the most precious human being in your life and not being able to. It really made me appreciate just that element of the trauma, both for the Kercher family and for my own, because, there were times in prison where my mom was suicidal because she really struggled with not being able to save me. And I think one of the ongoing struggles is all of us having to accept that in saving me, they can't totally save me because I can never go back to the life that I had before. I am forever changed, and the world has forever changed around me. And so how instead do we accept this very painful reality and still live with a sense of optimism and a sense of connection and a sense of purpose? And that has been my great mission, also because I feel that I have to be a model for my children. I can't just tell them how to live their life or tell them how to survive. I have to show them. And So when you ask, how am I talking to my kids about this crazy experience that I've been through? I believe that at least this, I believe that to be the best parent that I can be, I need to be transparent and I need to be age appropriately honest. So
They're a bit little at the moment, aren't they?
they are a bit little at the moment. So I'm not going to talk to them about the gruesome details of this experience, not just of what, happened to Meredith, but also what happened to me, the really, really bad things that happened to me in prison or that have happened to me since, like as a consequence of everything that happened. But what I can say is that when mommy was young, mommy went to go study in a foreign country and it was beautiful and she made friends. And then out of the blue, someone hurt her friend really badly. And they thought mommy hurt her friend. And so they put mommy in jail. And then mommy had to prove that she was innocent. And she got out of prison. And she's gone on with her life. She met Papa. She had you. The end, basically, at this point. At this point, it's really simple because also 3-year-olds have the attention span that they have. But it's been really interesting seeing her process that, because to her, stories are games. And she'll now want to play Mommy Goes to Italy with me.
Oh,
And so
I don't really know what to say about that.
Yeah. So she'll have me reenact like being behind prison bars, or she'll pretend to be mommy. Like if we see a playground where they have like the bars, she'll like be like, "Oh, look, I'm mommy in prison." Like this is, she is processing the way children process things, which is through play. And I
How do you
I
feel
I'm
when
do-
she does that?
I mean, I think the thing that immediately comes to mind is just astonishment, amazement at the beauty that children bring to our lives, because in a way it's almost like a kind of exposure therapy. It's almost like she's inadvertently giving me exposure therapy. Like, oh, let's just, I imagine, I don't spend a lot of time in therapy offices, but I imagine that some of the time therapists are asking their clients to relive these horrible experiences, so that they can relive them in a safe context, so they no longer feel like they are triggered by everything that reminds them of the experience. And now I am having the experience of having new memories layered on top of all of the bad ones that are between me and my daughter, that are ultimately positive ones because we're playing with each other. And so if anything, it's just yet another way to be grateful to be alive, to be grateful to have the daughter that I have, who's so smart and precocious and playful and kind. Um, I just feel really lucky.
Now, Amanda, we first met about 12 years ago, I think it was. And a lot has changed for both of us, actually. We're both mums of two. Mine are two boys. You've got one of each. And I remember...
Oh my God, the two boys. How do you deal with the testosterone in the room?
We're not quite at that stage yet, but it's emerging out of the 9-year-old every now and again. Now, when we chatted, it was just before your retrial. So you'd been tried, convicted, spent 4 years in jail. Then you'd been exonerated. You were back in Seattle. That was when we met. But then you were about to be retried in absentia, as you said. You didn't go back to Italy for that. And I remember asking you, I remember vividly saying to you, how would you feel if you were convicted again? Which that did end up happening. And you said to me at the time, it kills me to think people think I'm a murderer. And then as I was, in the weeks that leading up to me chatting to you today, I told some of my pals that we were going to have a conversation and an interview. And several of them said to me, did she do it? Ask her if she did it. And I said to them, she's been exonerated twice. The judicial system in Italy has definitively cleared her of murder. How do you live with that?
Well, I think that to defend your friends for just a second, because I'm always in the habit of defending the people who accuse me.
Are you? Is that
I
what
don't
you do?
think that. I mean, I think I'm ultimately a lover and not a fighter, so I tend to try to be as conciliatory and accommodating of people as possible. And what I'm about to say will explain why I think your friends are not crazy to have asked you that question. And the reason is because the Italian justice system didn't really give a satisfying answer for what really happened to Meredith. And the reason for that is because they tried the person who actually committed this crime separately from me and my co-defendant, Raffaele. And so he was tried separately. He was tried before us. And because the prosecution had already committed themselves to this false narrative that the break-in was staged, that Rudy Guede did not commit this crime alone, he was never charged. And no jury was ever asked to consider whether he had committed this crime alone. They were only ever asked to consider if he had committed this crime in with other people, which the assumption being that was me and Raffaele. Like that was the case that was brought before the judges and the jury when they tried Rudy Guede. And so they ultimately found him guilty because he was obviously guilty. But they never found him guilty of all of the crimes that he committed, including breaking into our home and stealing Meredith's money and phones and committing this crime by himself. So he was convicted separately, setting up the path for convicting me and Raffaele, because his conviction says he committed the crime with others, and who else could they be but the other two people that were accused of the crime. And so me and Raffaele enter into our own legal battle with that already, like that legal precedent already working against us. And the ultimate way that the Italian justice system exonerated me of the crime was not by recognizing my full innocence. They did not recognize that I had absolutely nothing to do with this crime. They left open the possibility that I was there and that I was present when this crime occurred, that I witnessed it. And that's the whole basis for which they have continued to wrongly convict me of this lesser crime, which is criminal slander, which is when you knowingly and willingly, purposefully accuse an innocent person of a crime you know for a fact they did not exist. The only way that I would be capable of committing that very heinous crime is if I was present when the crime occurred and I knew very well who the murderer was and who wasn't. So the way that the Supreme Court acquitted me and Raffaele was, I think, acknowledging that there was zero evidence that me and Raffaele had anything to do with it, but wanting to, there's a word in Italian called contentina, a little contentment. They wanted to give a little contentment to the prosecution by saying, well, Amanda and Raffaele didn't have anything to do with it, but maybe they were there when it happened. And when you say, maybe Amanda was there, likely Amanda was there when it happened, it makes zero sense. Like what scenario are we imagining where I was present when this crime occurred? I'm there when my roommate is getting raped and murdered and I'm just sitting back watching? Or I'm like, what is this scenario that they've imagined? So like there is this very terrible and unsatisfactory legal truth to the case that is entirely not based in truth and leaves it open for people to attack me and say, you were there, you were involved, you know more than what you're saying, so you're guilty of something, we just don't know what. So we can't say that you're guilty. You've been acquitted based on a technicality. That's like the ongoing trauma of this case is that
does
for
every
everyone.
day, does every day feel like you're still on trial in some way? People in the street, mums in the playground, thinking maybe, maybe not.
So I'm fortunate that in my day-to-day life, the people who I encounter and who know me, who are like a part of my life, part of my community, they all know that I had nothing to do with it, and no one bats an eye. But that doesn't mean that I do not feel like every other wrongly convicted person ever, but especially because I was so publicly vilified and accused. I feel like I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving my innocence. And that is a burden that I carry due to the wrongs that were done to me by my prosecutor and by the legal system in Italy. And so I don't know when I encounter a new person in a new place, what they think of me, what they think they know about me or the case or whatever. And I found that this case in particular is very sticky in people's minds, for better or for worse. And I say for worse because clearly that means that, again, it means that people are still to this day speculating and curious about did she or didn't she? And the for better is that it means that this case touched a nerve I think, a sort of global nerve about what we think about women, what we think about justice, what we think about media. And I think people recognize that embedded deep within this tragedy that has many victims, there is a lot to be learned, and that there's a lot that we need to examine about it so that we can understand ourselves. And so I try to embrace that side of the stickiness of this case, recognizing that there is value in looking closely at what happened and learning from it and trying to glean the truth, because the truth matters.
Amanda, at the heart of this story, your life, is Meredith. You know, she was a young British woman raped and brutally murdered on her year abroad.
Yeah.
I know that you've reached out to her family. They don't want to engage with you. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I certainly do not want to put words into their mouth. That would be a great question to ask them. However, what I will say is that it is not uncommon in cases of wrongful conviction for family members of the first and primary victim to hang on to this sense of first of all assuming guilt of the exonerated person, thinking that they wouldn't have been accused in the first place if they weren't actually, in some way guilty of something. But I think the other thing that Meredith's family is grappling with is the fact that this case spiraled out of control very quickly. And discerning the truth about what happened to Meredith very, very quickly became secondary to the scandalous narrative that was unfolding about the case and the vilification of me. And I think one of their complaints that I 100% agree with is that when people think of this case, they don't remember Meredith's name. They remember mine. They don't even remember the murderer's name. They remember mine. And if this case had been investigated and prosecuted and written about publicly, properly, no one would ever know who I was. I would be just another one of Meredith's roommates, but that's not what transpired. And so I guess my lingering sort of hurt is that and I call this in my book the single victim fallacy. This idea that in any given tragedy, there's only one real victim, and so there's like a kind of victim, or if there's not just one real victim, there's a victim hierarchy, and so one victim need necessarily be deferential or get permission from the primary victim before they in any way can acknowledge their own victimhood. And I deny that. I deny that as a fallacy. That is not a real position to take. It's an understandably emotional position to take, but it's not a logical and it's not a fair position to take. That my life or my story doesn't matter because in comparison to what happened to Meredith, I got off, I get to live my life and I got off easy, So I think that, oh, go ahead.
Amanda, does it bother you that they perhaps don't think you're innocent?
It 100% bothers me. It very much bothers me. And I think the thing that, again, I don't know because I don't know. Everyone's different. And also, people evolve with time. And I've literally never had access to Meredith's family, ever. I've never met them. They don't know who I am, and they only know me through the worst context possible. And I guess my biggest grief about all of that is that, in the past, Meredith's family has been very, very dignified and thoughtful in their responses to the case, right? Like, when we were first convicted, I remember their press conference when they said that, while we are happy with the verdict, this is not a moment of celebration. This is a thing that matters, but it's ultimately a tragedy for everyone involved. And obviously at that time they thought I was guilty, and that was, me being convicted and sentenced to 26 years in prison was the right thing. I don't know. And then I remember at a certain point during my appeals process, they were interviewed and they said something like, well, obviously we don't want the wrong people in prison for this crime. But in the years since I've been freed and exonerated and recognized as not, at the very least, not having committed this heinous crime against Meredith, even if the Italian justice system left, windows of possibility open that are, don't make any sense whatsoever and only serve to vilify me further. I think that their response to me telling my story has been one which assumes my guilt. This idea that there's no value to me telling my story, or that all it does is, desecrate the memory of Meredith for me to tell my story. I'm devastated that that's how they feel.
Do you think about Meredith, Amanda?
Oh my God, every day. And it's interesting because Meredith and I didn't really know each other very well. We had only known each other for a few weeks. But because her death is wrapped up with my identity, I talk about this in my book. I wrote a whole chapter about Meredith and about what it feels like to carry her legacy alongside me, and also just to look back and have to dig through years of traumatic experiences just to get back to my memories of her as a person, of her as my roommate, as the person who I made cookies with, and that we went to the flea market together and we went thrift shopping together, and we, she helped me with my Italian homework. That person. That was a real person in my life, and she was just like me. She was 1 year older than me. She liked to read. She was studying journalism. She loved the Italian culture and the Italian language. We were both studying abroad and in Perugia in the same house. We had so much in common, and everything was taken from her, and almost everything was taken from me. And I do feel like in some ways we are linked because of that. Like we are two sides of the same coin. And fate just flipped that coin and I came up heads and she came up tails. That there's just this, like, the deepest trauma of my life and a life-defining trauma is also, embedded in that is a human being who did not survive her study abroad experience and who very well could have been me. And like that is like, so when I think about her a lot, that is to say, and the thing that I wish that I still had in my life was the opportunity to grieve her, to really, like, to visit her grave and to grieve her and to share those moments with her family where she was a kind, she was a friend, and to share in that grief, because I think just, even more than me, their lives also had a life-defining tragedy happen to them. And so we have a lot more in common than I think they think. And I feel like we could heal a lot together, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And it's not in my control. And so I have to then go back to remembering what I do have control over, which is, the ability to tell my story, the ability to make connections with people, and to just keep trying, to just put myself out there so that they know that I want to talk to them. And they know, I mean, I don't know if they've ever even given me like a second thought to the opportunity that maybe I might have something meaningful to say or some kind of connection with them. I don't know if they've allowed themselves to consider that, because it
What would you
involves
say to them,
confronting a
Amanda?
lot
All
of
this
trauma.
time now, all this time has passed. What would you say now to them?
I want to grieve with you. And, it's not fair what happened. It's not. And I understand why it feels like you never got justice for her, because you didn't. And I care about that.
You just talked then, Amanda, about connections that you've made with people since, and there have been, there's so many things that you do now for organizations, charities, the Innocence Project. And one of the things that I was really surprised at, really, in your book, a connection that you made, someone you're now very good friends with, and that is Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, the
What?
glorious Monica Lewinsky,
Yeah.
yes.
What is it? Why is this connection so strong? And how did it come about?
When I first met her, it was the first time that I was ever invited to speak publicly to a room full of strangers about what had happened to me. I was invited to this speaking event where other people were invited, and the theme was controversy. And so, of course, they had all of these controversial figures, but the one who I was most interested in talking to was Monica. And when I met Monica, she immediately went into big sister mode. Just, how are you doing? Are you okay? How are you feeling about what you're going to do? Do you need any tips? Like, do you need some tea? Are you getting, are you talking to someone who's going to help you process this emotionally once you get done? Like, she had to go through the gauntlet of being vilified and vilified and vilified over and over and over again. And so she knew what I was up against. She knew how to dig oneself out of a grave, and how much of a toll it takes on you. And so she really became like a big sister to me as I was navigating my own journey of reclaiming my identity and reclaiming my story.
Do you feel like you've done that now, Amanda?
Yes, I do, because I think a lot of it is about a mindset. So not feeling diminished or limited by the stories other people tell about you, right? Like I'll never in any way like be at a place where every single person in the world will recognize my innocence and will understand with absolute clarity everything that happened in this case, and I am definitively and utterly vindicated and freed. Like, that's not going to happen, and I'm not aspiring for that to happen. Instead, what I'm aspiring to is using my voice for good, really standing up for what I believe in, standing up for who I am and for who I was, and honoring the truth of what happened, deriving, common sense strategies to address systems so that we no longer victimize people in the future. And I've embraced myself as a storyteller, as someone who has been forced to learn how to articulate very complicated concepts and positions while under fire, when again not given the benefit of the doubt. So I have gone through I've been through the school of hard knocks. I got a PhD from the school of hard knocks, and I am now putting that, I feel, to good use. And I feel like with time I'm being recognized for that, for something that I actually am doing, instead of a story made up by an old man in Italy that I didn't do.
Amanda, thank you very much for talking to me again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.